This Zoom session will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all who registered. It will also be posted at the website greenblueandyou.org. At the end or during the webinar, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And during the Q&A, you will have the opportunity to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your question verbally if you like. And if anyone needs Spanish translation, please let us know now. And Marlon, can you ask the same question?
Yeah. Si alguien gusta traducción en español, por favor, puede decirnos o puede también escribirlo en el chat, por favor.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. Again, hello all. Welcome everyone. Very glad you could join us this evening. My name is John McKenna, and this is the 6th installment of the Menlo Park Community Collaboration Sessions in partnership with Menlo Spark and the 350 Silicon Valley Menlo Park Climate Team. Tonight, as the title of our event implies, we are going to focus on water heaters, specifically replacing gas water heaters with electric heat pump water heaters. We are in the midst of a human-caused climate crisis that is heating up our planet, our only home, to concerning levels, especially for our most vulnerable individuals and communities. We need not look any great distance to witness what is happening. Coast-to-coast heat waves that appear with more frequency and greater intensity. Canadian wildfires that have burnt the equivalent of the entire state of West Virginia in a matter of months, with lung-damaging smoke affecting cities across the continent. Torrential rains and flooding in Vermont that has devastated towns and destroyed crops just prior to harvest, resulting in lost food, lost dollars, and heartache. And the list goes on, far longer than many of us could have imagined this soon. Borrowing the inspirational words of Amanda Gorman in her poem, Earthrise, so I tell you this, not to scare you, but to prepare you, to dare you, to dream a different reality. We are at a point now that every decision we make needs to be considered with how it impacts the environment. Quite simply, we must stop extracting and burning fossil fuels and stop purchasing and installing and using fossil fuel-powered devices as quickly as is humanly possible. Breaking our addiction to fossil fuels is not the only change needed to properly address the climate crisis, but it is one of the most important. If you have the means to make significant changes, there is an obligation to do so. If you're struggling to put food on the table for your children, the burden is not yours, but there is assistance to help you make a meaningful contribution to this effort. So, you might ask, what difference does it make how my next water heater is powered? Will it solve the climate crisis? No. Is it nonetheless really important? Absolutely yes. Tonight, we will learn why it's important, what are the co-benefits of going electric, of which there are many, including meaningful health benefits, how to make the switch, how cities, governments, and other organizations are making it easier to do so, and a brief discussion of career opportunities. Lastly, we will have time at the end to take some of your questions. The event will have a bit of a Menlo Park focus, but most of the content will apply to all of San Mateo County and beyond. So again, thank you for being here with us. Next slide. Our speakers tonight include Tom Cabot. Tom is an energy and electrification expert and a tremendous wealth of knowledge and great ideas. Ruben Veek of Sunwork. Ruben is a master installer of heat pump water heaters and rooftop solar panels. Sunwork is a nonprofit that utilizes the labor of volunteers, an experience that I've participated in on several occasions and highly recommend. Nancy Headley. Nancy is the chair of Menlo Park's Environmental Quality Commission. She's speaking tonight as an individual and is filling in for Rebecca Lucky, Menlo Park's sustainability manager. And I will briefly discuss the various rebates, tax breaks, and other financial incentives that are currently and soon to be available. Next slide. And here's a quick look at our agenda. Next slide. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are in a climate crisis. Many of you attending may already fully understand this, but we think it's important to mention it as a catalyst for change. I will add that a statewide survey released this month by the Public Policy Institute of California found that one, an overwhelming majority, 77%, say climate change has contributed to the state's recent extreme weather. Two, most Californians, 61%, say stricter environmental laws and regulations in California are worth the cost. And three, a strong majority, 68%, support efforts to protect the environment, even at the risk of curbing economic growth. So, public opinion is moving in the right direction. And on the last point, there is a good argument to be made that a just transition to clean energy will have huge benefits for society and will spur economic growth, not curb it. Next slide. What you see here is the path to emissions reductions in Menlo Park. It's important to note that the decrease from 2005 to 2017 resulted primarily from the formation of Peninsula Clean Energy, or PCE, and its supply of carbon-free electricity. Going forward, as the percentages show, there's much work left to do as it relates to emissions from vehicles and fossil gas use in buildings. Your water heater is typically the device in your home that produces the second most emissions after the furnace. So replacing a gas water heater with an electric heat pump powered by clean electricity from PCE is an impactful way to reduce your emissions. Next slide. We briefly wanted to talk about Menlo Park's Climate Action Plan, which was adopted in 2020 and co-authored by Tom Cabot. The city has a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. In order to achieve that goal, there are 5 key mitigation components, plus a need for climate adaptation. As you can see in the first box, the city needs to electrify 95% of the existing homes and commercial buildings by 2030. Replacing every gas water heater at the end of its useful life, if not sooner, with a heat pump is critical. Next slide. Now, Tom will walk us through the many reasons to switch out our gas water heaters and the many co-benefits of doing so. Tom, take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, John. So everyone, thanks for joining us to talk about domestic hot water and why it means more than just getting into trouble at home. So today we're going to talk about the heat pump water heater version of water heating and a few reasons why it's important for us. We'll start with a little bit of background on the local 9-county Bay Area Air Quality Management District. That's that BACMD acronym up there. They have a set of rule changes, which I just saw in the newspaper mentioned again recently. And those rule changes are to finally try to do the final steps to get in compliance with federal air standards. Our Bay Area region emits too much nitrous oxide pollution. And so the Air District has a new rule going into effect on water heaters in 2027, which will not let people install gas tank water heaters when they replace their water heaters. So the plumbers will go to the shelves and they'll find the heat pump water heaters and they'll be installing those starting in 2027. And we're hoping to help ease the transition into that rule by helping folks do the early adoption now and future-proofing their homes, getting ready for the rule. The second reason is safety at your home, reduced risk of fire by not having a gas water heater, not having explosive gas in your garage, and not having the risk of poisoning from carbon monoxide poisoning from incomplete combustion that sometimes happens if somebody dislodges the exhaust tube or draws a vacuum on the house some way by turning on a bathroom exhaust fan that sucks exhaust backwards in the house. So these things are safer. These heat pump water heaters, we'll explain how they work. I think Ruben will go into that a little bit, or I'll just mention right now, they're like a backwards refrigerator. Your refrigerator is extracting heat out of the ice box at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. It's raising that cold temperature heat to a warmer temperature and emitting it into the kitchen. I usually feel mine as warm air blowing across my toes as the refrigerator rejects the heat it collected out of the icebox. So anyway, a heat pump water heater will do that same thing, say in your garage or basement or wherever your water heater is. It'll gather heat, raise it to the right temperature, and put it into the tank of water. So that's a good reason to make the switch. They're super energy efficient. They use only 1 unit of electricity to gather 3 more units of heat and then put all 4 units of energy into the hot water heater. So you pay for 1 and you get 4 units of heat. Then they're also zero greenhouse gas emissions. So we're in that climate emergency that John has told us about, and we need to be working our way out of it. We're the generation that needs to get going on this. Some people ask me, hey, what about tankless water heaters? That must be good. And well, no, tankless gas water heaters are still emitting a ton of pollution, and even more because they leak gas. They puff gas every time they ignite and turn off. They leak some gas that goes up into the atmosphere unburned, where it is 86 times as bad as if we had burned it, or really about 25 times if you correct for the molecular weights. Heat pump water heaters, like we're talking about tonight, they have a nice big tank to store a lot of energy, to deliver a whole lot of hot water during morning hot water rush hour, or whenever your family has hot water rush hour. So the tanks are a big bonus on these, and also that supplies a whole lot of earthquake water that you don't have with a tankless water heater. After a quake, you're out of luck. You don't have any stored water. Heat pump technology also is not new, and so that's why we mentioned the refrigerator example. You've had one for years. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide on this. It's about power efficiency, and so that's been one of my focuses as a utility resource planner for a long time. I want to see, how do we make our homes fully electrified and not overload the grid and not overload our own electric panels? So we've been working out methods to do this, and really it just comes down to choosing the most efficient technologies and choosing the right sizes of them. And so right here in the middle of the chart, and I can't really show you with my cursor, but in the middle from top to bottom of that chart, yep, thank you, just below that are 3 heat pump water heater examples. The small bar is a 120 volt plug-in heat pump water heater, very simple to electrify. You just plug it into any existing outlet. And the middle bar is a 240 volt 15 amp heat pump water heater, and Sunwork installs a bunch of those. And then there are the big bar there is the very common 240 volt 30 amp heat pump water heater, which was kind of the first iteration of heat pump water heaters when they got more popular about 10 or 15 years ago. They really just took a 30 amp electric water heater and put a compressor on it that would gather heat from the garage and do a lot of energy saving, but they kept the big powerful backup resistors. But it turns out if you get a big tank, you don't really need those backup resistors. So it's kind of nice to slide down the scale towards the smaller power using options. And then the rest of the graph is just showing you other end uses, like at the bottom is different sized car chargers and how many thousands of miles you can go. Like a 20 amp circuit will drive you 39,000 miles a year, is kind of that middle bar towards the bottom. Different options there. So one reason to pay attention to power efficiency is to free up space on your electric panel and give you room to do the whole rest of your electrification. And so we call that process kind of making an electrification plan. It's really thinking about how far you want to go and then sizing the devices so you can fit them all on your electric panel together. And so that's all I have for now, and I'll turn it back to you, John.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. Great info. Now, Ruben will share his knowledge and expertise when it comes to what it takes to actually install a heat pump water heater, along with a couple case studies. Ruben, you're up.
Thanks, John. So now that you've heard some of the benefits of heat pump water heaters, once you're ready to get started with a heat pump water heater project at your own home, here are a few recommendations for choosing a contractor. To begin, you can consider looking at the contractor lists on rebate program websites. Eligibility for the different heat pump water heater rebates, which are quite generous right now and help a lot with the cost. which John will talk about. So eligibility for these rebates often requires using a contractor that is enrolled in the particular rebate programs. So that's a good way to sort of get to the right contractors from the beginning. Next, get multiple bids. It's recommended to get at least 3 bids for any construction project to see the range of solutions that get proposed and the range of prices that are quoted. And then finally, check reviews. Online reviews on Yelp or Google can be informative, or ask to be put in touch with 1 or 2 previous customers. And then to provide a better sense of what a heat pump water heater project might look like at your own particular home, we've also got a list of a few relevant factors to think about. The first is physical space. It's simplest to install an integrated heat pump water heater, which has the heat pump built into the tank. And it's simplest to place this in the same spot in the home where the gas water heater was located. But integrated heat pump water heaters are quite a bit larger than their gas counterparts to support the same amount of hot water use, so they may not always fit. A second factor is air availability. In order to operate properly, the heat pump needs access to a substantial volume of air to draw heat from. A closet may be an option, but only if the door allows plenty of air exchange with the space beyond, or if ducting is installed to connect the water heater to a larger space. And then a third factor for heat pump water heaters is sound. Heat pumps make some sound while operating. You've all heard your refrigerators operating and kind of have a sense for the sound that they can make. The sound isn't loud enough to need to speak up to talk over it, but it will be an audible part of the soundscape in the room where an integrated heat pump water heater is located, and sometimes in adjacent rooms, especially through uninsulated interior walls. For some customers, this may rule out certain installation locations. And then there is one other option, although they're more expensive than integrated heat pump water heaters. Split heat pump water heaters that place the tank indoors, but the heat pump outdoors can work well in some situations where integrated heat pump water heaters cannot. And then next, we'll look at a few different concrete examples. Next slide. So we have 4 case studies covering a range of different installation scenarios, and hopefully you'll see one that looks like your home among them. Okay. Next slide. So the first case that we're looking at here is for a tankless water heater that was in a garage. So these scenarios where the existing water heaters in the garage are sort of the real low-hanging fruit for heat pump water heater installation. These are the easiest scenarios to electrify. So there's not a whole lot of a challenge to talk about for this, but the main kind of consideration when selecting a heat pump water heater for this scenario is just that garage temperatures can get pretty low in the winter. Garages generally won't be conditioned, so the air temperature will sort of swing around through the seasons. And in large part, this is actually an advantage for heat pump water heaters, since no extra energy will get spent replenishing the heat that's drawn from the air. The garage will just be a few degrees colder year round, and that works fine. But for integrated heat pump water heaters, if the air gets below about 37 degrees, the heat pump will no longer be able to operate effectively to draw heat from it, which is a limitation. Next slide. So the solution for this, as sort of Tom had gestured at, is just to choose a model that has backup resistance heat. So this was sort of like the original design for heat pump water heaters, and most models have this feature, but not all. So the resistance heating option gives up efficiency, but only gets used when the heat pump can't deliver. And for this particular project, we selected a 15 amp model over the more common 30 amp, just as Tom was mentioning, to maximize how much leftover capacity the home's electrical system would have for future electrification. And in this case, the heat pump water heater was hardwired to a nearby circuit breaker panel that was also conveniently located in the garage. So this is about the sort of the textbook, really slam dunk installation scenario. So if this is what any of your homes look like, definitely encouraged to look at heat pump water heaters right away. Next slide. For our second case study, this one is a little more complicated. So we were replacing a gas water heater that was located in a laundry room closet. And the main challenge with this one, there was no path available to route a new circuit to connect the water heater. The laundry room was in the middle of the house, at a second story above it, a slab foundation below. So it would definitely be impractical to try to get new wiring to that location. Next slide. So in this case, our solution ended up being a 120 volt plug-in heat pump water heater option. So it's still integrated with the heat pump, sort of combined with the tank. And we were able to take advantage of this unit because there was an existing electrical outlet available within 6 feet of the water heater location. This particular 120 volt model does not feature backup resistance, but because this location is inside of the conditioned space of the house, there's very little risk of the room getting so cold for the heat pump to stop being able to function effectively. And then in this scenario, the closet was too small in terms of air volume. So venting was added to the closet door to provide access to extra air from the space outside it. So those are my 2 examples. And then I think John has an example from his own life.
Yes, I do. So thank you, Ruben. Really appreciate your knowledge and the care that you take to make sure your water heater installs are done in a superior manner. Now I wanted to share with you my personal case study. I knew that one of the water heaters in my duplex was old and would need to be replaced soon. I had done a bit of research, but hadn't decided on a plan. And then a couple months later, the old water heater failed and made the plan for me. I needed an emergency replacement. I had made a pledge to myself that I would never buy another fossil fuel powered device for the rest of my life. So I knew I had to get a heat pump. Not surprisingly, I called Sunwork, and within 48 hours, I had a new 40-gallon heat pump water heater. It turns out that the old gas water heater that I had was only 30 gallons. I had actually assumed it was 40 gallons, but I didn't know it was only 30 until after the insulation wrapped around the old unit was removed. So I ended up with a new upsized heat pump water heater in the same space where the old 30-gallon was installed. And the rebates that are currently available, which we will discuss later in further detail, the total cost to me was $0. Replacing the old gas water heater with another gas water heater would have likely cost in the range of $1,000 to $3,000. So really a win-win. I do want to note, however, that every situation is different as homes are unique, but in most cases right now, it will cost less, and in some cases much less, to replace a gas water heater with a heat pump versus gas with gas. Not to mention the significant environmental benefits and health benefits of zero NOx emissions. Lastly, a bit of advice. Do your best to avoid finding yourself in an emergency situation like I was in. Do some planning ahead. As I've demonstrated, you still can and should install a heat pump water heater in an emergency situation. However, I had to install a 240 volt 30 amp unit because that was all that was in stock locally at the time. Had I planned ahead, I would have installed a 120 volt unit or a 240 volt 15 amp unit in order to preserve panel space for future electrification projects. On the additional resources slide at the end of this presentation is a link to a document that will help you to determine the age of your current water heater. If it's 10 years old or older, it's time to start planning. Now, Nancy will share her recent experience installing a heat pump water heater.
Thanks, John. So we had a tankless gas water heater in the attic, and it was getting old, and then all of a sudden it died, like John. So we had to make some decisions pretty quickly, and it was challenging because our garage is detached, so that wasn't going to work. We don't have a basement, and the laundry room is in the middle of the house, so it wasn't a great spot to put an integrated system. Next slide, please. What we ended up going with was the split system, the Senko 2. So the heat pump is located outside of our house, and then the water tank is located in our laundry room. And how we made space for it was we had a washer and dryer side by side, and then we had to move to a stackable system. So the water tank is now living where the washing machine used to be. And it's working fine. It's working great, actually. And I think the bonus electrification is that the dryer actually became electric in this whole transition. I do have to say, though, that this solution was a bit more expensive, so I was really grateful for the rebates. But I'm hopeful that there will be additional technological innovations so that this can be a more accessible solution to people who need something like this. Back to you, John.
All right. Thank you for sharing your story, Nancy. Very interesting and creative. So let's talk about costs. I will explain the financial incentives that are available now and those that will be available soon for switching from gas to electric heat pump water heaters. As you can see on this slide, there are some robust rebates and tax incentives currently available. In PCE territory, which includes all of San Mateo County and the city of Los Banos, there is a $3,000 rebate for replacing a gas water heater with a heat pump water heater. And in the 9 Bay Area counties, there is another $1,000 rebate available through BayREN as long as you use a contractor approved by BayREN. One note, the BayREN rebate will be reduced to $400 at the end of this month, but this will be supplanted by the SGIP rebate that I'll describe in a minute. Additionally, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, there's a 30% tax break for electrification. Lastly, any remaining costs up to $10,000 can be financed through PCE at a 0% interest rate. Next slide, please. Later this year or in early 2024, additional rebates will be available through the Federal Inflation Reduction Act for low and moderate income households. The rebate for a heat pump water heater will be $1,750 for low income homes and $875 for moderate income households. These rebates can be stacked on top of the rebates I described above. Additionally, California will be rolling out some significant rebates this fall. Through the Self-Generation Incentive Program, or SGIP, all individuals can receive a heat pump water heater rebate of $3,800. Low-income residents are entitled to an even greater rebate of $4,885. In order to participate in this program, you'll need to have a thermostatic mixing valve installed, which costs about $150 and is standard practice for Sunwork. You'll also need to enroll in the Demand Response Program, which may require you, when the grid is near capacity, to reduce your energy use for a short period of time. However, having a properly programmed heat pump water heater with a thermostatic mixing valve is one way to help meet this requirement. So, all in all, there are tremendous financial incentives that are now available and or will be available soon across all income levels. And as these products move along the manufacturing learning curve and production increases, the cost to manufacture them and install them should come down. Now, Nancy will walk us through the steps that the City of Menlo Park has taken to make electrification easier for its residents. If you don't live in Menlo Park and your city or county has not taken similar steps, this is an opportunity for you to advocate for similar changes to be made in your community. Nancy, take it away.
Thanks, John. All right, so I'm speaking here on behalf of Rebecca Lucky, who is the City of Menlo Park's Sustainability Manager. And last August, 2022, the city implemented a permit fee waiver program so that you don't have to pay any permit fees if you're doing electrification projects. And this is to support, we want as a city to help everyone move away from gas-powered appliances to electric. And we wanted to reduce any barriers that were in the way of that. It's similar to our city's solar permit fee waiver program. And if you're doing a larger project like a kitchen remodel, you can get up to a $500 permit credit as part of that larger process. And there's a great set of self-guided questions on the city's online permit system website And, for most of us as homeowners, we're not going to be dealing with the permit situation directly. This is typically handled by the contractor who's doing the work for your installation. But you or your contractor can always call the building division at that number at the bottom of this slide and get help because they want to help you do this. And I would also encourage, if you don't live in Menlo Park and you're finding that your city has fees for electrification projects, I would encourage you to encourage them to get rid of those so that more and more people can electrify. Back to you, John.
All right, thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Menlo Park, for taking these important steps. Now Ruben will discuss career opportunities and how Sunwork can play a role in helping to build the workforce. Ruben, go right ahead.
Thanks, Sean. As more and more buildings are getting electrified in the coming decade, workforce development of heat pump, HVAC installers, plumbers, and electricians is going to be a key to success. There are already lots of folks working in these spaces, plumbers, electricians, but the task of switching these appliances from heating sources increase the amount of work associated with these projects quite a bit. And so we're going to need to really multiply the workforce somewhat in order to be able to keep up with the challenge. These end up being great careers that are well-paying, stable, with transferable skills, and they're active both mentally and physically. So lots to be excited about with these jobs. They can also be a great path to owning your own business. A lot of plumbing electrical companies are sort of small shops just seeded from other small plumbing and electrical companies. So if that's something that appeals to somebody, this could be a useful career track to look at. And then our own organization, Sunwork, also offers opportunities for volunteers to get hands-on heat pump water heater installation experience, working alongside the professional installers on our staff. It's sort of a nice low stakes way to explore what working in construction is like, since you don't have to quit your day job, or just to learn new skills. Our next onboarding session for new volunteers will be held on Zoom on September 7th, and registration is open now at sunwork.org.
Great. You're done, Ruben?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes the presentation portion of our webinar. We now have plenty of time to take your questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. You can also use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we can unmute you so that you can ask your question verbally if you like. And feel free to share your unique water heater situation and challenges. And Tom and Ruben will do their best to provide suggestions, solutions, and to point you towards appropriate resources. So any questions or hurdles you encountered with your water heater situation? Do we have any questions in the chat that haven't been answered?
Yeah, there were some questions just about the timing for different rebates that came in the chat. So maybe I can just provide answers, or as it'll turn out, sort of non-answers to those. So the two big upcoming rebates that, as John mentioned, are the SCHIP program and the rebates that come through the federal IRA. The SCHIP, neither has sort of a firm start date, but SCHIP rebates are expected to become available sometime, maybe like end of August, beginning of September currently. It slips a little bit, but that's what we're hoping for at this point. And then there was also a question about sort of stackability, like how that rebate would be able to be combined with some of the other programs. And the Bay Rent Home Plus rebate should be stackable or combinable with the SCHIP rebate to help lower the overall project cost even further. I have not seen any guidance about whether PCE will have their rebates stackable with SCHIP. I know that in the past, when sort of large statewide rebate programs have launched, sometimes the local rebates have sort of reduced their incentives correspondingly to try to keep the overall project cost at sort of like an approachable, in their sweet spot. And then for the IRA rebates, there's even less guidance about that. I think sort of end of this year, beginning of next year is what people are thinking.
Great, thanks, Ruben. We have a question from Andrea. Can you say more about the trade-offs on 30 amp versus 15 amp? Any downsides to the 15 amp?
Yep. So Andrea, I'd like to start first, but then have Ruben weigh in. So I've got a heat pump water heater. I put it in myself in 2016, having picked up some electrification skills from being a volunteer also with Sunwork. And so I was comfortable putting in the 240 volt circuit myself and putting that thing together. And we just turned it on to heat pump only mode, and it just runs, and it's a 50-gallon tank, and it's never disappointed us. But we're just a 2-person household. And it's more hot water than our old 40-gallon gas-fired tank used to give us. So it's been pretty good for us. Now, when you go up from compressor only, which you could get in a 120 volt model, to the next one, like 15 amp 240 volt, you also get backup resistance heating. And it's really just a matter of the power and speed with which it can reheat the tank and deliver some more hot water. So it can deliver a little more hot water in that first hour rush hour by having the resistor working and using a bunch of electricity during that hour, trying to keep up. But if your tank's big enough, the resistor doesn't have to come on. And the other thing that we do in modern installations now is to have a higher temperature setting on the tank. So to raise it up to 130 degrees, 135 degrees, which is too hot to deliver into the pipes on the shower because it might scald you. So then it's mixed down with a mixing valve installed there that mixes a little bit of cold water in there to get it to the dialed in temperature, say 120 degrees, that you'd want running through your pipes to give you that 110 degree shower you would enjoy. And so anyway, the downsides to a 15 amp one would be just if your tank was too small, a 15 amp version of the water heater wouldn't be able to keep up as well as a 30 amp version. And so to overcome it, I just recommend people pick the biggest tank that fits their wallet and their space. And the tanks kind of go in 4 sizes: 40 gallons, 50, 65, and 80 gallon tank size. So take a look at that space available and the wallet and pick a big tank if you want to use a lot of hot water, or get better shower heads so they work well with the water heater you have.
Great, thanks, Tom. Anything to add, Ruben?
No, yeah, I think that covers it well. Yes, for us, 15 amp is plenty to be able to sort of take over from the heat pump in those sort of rare scenarios where the heat pump might not be able to work because the air has gotten too cold or there's an equipment issue. The only reason to go up to 30 would be if you're not able to fit a big enough tank to sort of like, to provide all your showers from within the tank without having to rely on fast reheating.
Great. We have a question from Susanna. All the quotes we got for heat pump water heater installation were $6,000 or above. We have just a small house. Does this sound like a right price? Susanna, I don't know if you want to come off mute and maybe explain your situation a little more, and then maybe Ruben can speak to the cost. Nancy, are you able to unmute Susanna? Oh, I think I can do it. Great. Susanna?
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, you want to describe your situation a little bit?
I don't have a lot to say about the situation. It's a regular old Menlo Park bungalow, and we have a gas tank, and we're not in a hurry. We're being proactive. And we were looking for, I think it was a 60-gallon tank. And I guess there's some wiring that would need to come from a panel that's about 15 feet away. So we were just puzzled. We had expected to be able to do it within pretty much what the rebates were. And that's why I was just wondering what might be happening.
Ruben, you want to, any follow-up questions for her? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that number seems like the $6,000 number for that scenario seems you know, plausible. Probably there are contractors that could do it for a little less. For a project like that, for 65-gallon heat pump water heater where the electrical panel was was nice and close and accessible, like our own installation charge, if it was in a garage or one of these locations that we can work with, would probably be closer to like 5,000 before rebates. So if the $6,000 number was before subsidies, then yeah, I can see that just being sort of the difference between our our sort of nonprofit volunteer driven model and a for-profit company. If the $6,000 price was net of rebates, then that definitely seems too high. But
Great,
sorry,
thank you.
so Susanna, did you say that you're in Menlo Park also?
Yes, in Menlo Park.
Okay, yeah. So in that case, our number would, like, because Menlo Park is waiving the permit fees for these projects, whereas in other cities it's often $300 or $400. Our number would probably actually be a little bit lower than that, maybe like 4,500 or 4,700. And if your water heater is in like a utility room or a laundry room, one of these sort of easy installation scenarios, then it's quite possible that Sunwork would be able to help with that installation too. You could feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, well, thank you. You're on the Bayren list of contractors, right?
We are, yeah.
Okay, all right.
And I thought I had one more reference point. I'm here from people who go out and get gas water heater bids also, that those are about $2,700 contractor installed when they're getting a permit. So just to put it into a reference point.
Yeah, so with the rebates that are available now and the tax breaks, you'll probably end up less expensive net after all the rebates and tax incentives. But
To use a heat pump water heater, right?
Right.
You're getting thousands of dollars off, and then a tax credit of 30% on the remaining costs if you pay taxes.
Yep.
And lots of us do.
And then again, you could finance the balance at 0% through Peninsula Clean Energy if you wanted to do that. Okay, we have a couple questions from Pam Jones. What is the response time for city to review and sign off? Ruben, you had a recent experience. You want to talk about that and maybe explain how the permitting works and how there aren't always delays? Yeah,
so there's a lot of variability from jurisdiction to jurisdiction that's handled either at the city level or for people who live in unincorporated county territory. There are county offices that handle the permitting. In some cities, a contractor can sort of self apply for their own permit and get it instantly through the city website. Menlo Park is doing great at permit fees, but they are not on the fast end for review times, which I think is one area that if they're looking for sort of a next area to focus on, could be a good one. And let's see, I think we've been seeing review times of sort of a few weeks for permit applications submitted in Menlo Park.
Yeah, and we have heard that the city's working on tightening that up. So
hopefully that's just for permit issuance. Once the permit is issued and the project is installed, the inspections tend to be faster than that, just sort of a few days out.
Great. And Pam also asks, is electrification considered an improvement that will cause an increase in taxes? My guess is no, but does anyone know the answer? If
Yeah,
not,
that's a great question that I don't know the answer to. I know that it's common for building departments to sort of forward information about permit applications to the county assessor's office so that they are aware of improvements, but I don't know what does and does not. I think that may just be so they can find square footage additions and things like that. Yeah.
Pam, we will do a little research and try to get back to you with a better answer. Okay. So Rich asks, a fellow Menlo Park resident installed a hybrid heat pump water heater in his garage last year. It shares a common wall with an occupied part of his house. I think it was a Rheem. He was surprised and unhappy that it's so noisy. I've heard it running. He's right to complain. Will quieter such units ever be developed? If so, how soon? And Eduardo did put an answer there.
I think that is and the manufacturers are aware that that is sort of probably the most like when somebody has a sort of prominent complaint about a heat pump water heater, that is typically what it is. So I think that is an area of focus, and I know that the sort of next generation series from A.O. Smith is switching out the fan for a blower, kind of a different air moving device in order to try to get sound down. So yeah, hopefully there will be improvements like that that sort of like help with that. And then in sort of very sound sensitive situations, those split systems like the Sandon option, the only equipment that has the generating any sound is the part that goes outside of the house. The tank itself is perfectly quiet. So so those can be a good option, although they are a little more expensive.
Yeah, so on my side, expanding on our case, the Rheem unit that we got was noisy. I think they had 1 year that there was an extra noisy fan. So there were multiple reports on the internet. We asked for a new part. They sent it to us. They even paid for the part to be installed. But we also put some extra insulation around the tank, and actually around the unit on top of the tank, and you can hear it if you pay a lot of attention, but otherwise we don't. But we did have to do a couple of things.
Great, thanks, Eduardo. Andrea asked, does Sunwork operate in Mountain View as well?
Yes, yeah. So for heat pump water heater projects, we're doing all of San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, northern Santa Cruz County, and western Alameda and Contra Costa counties. So a pretty big coverage territory.
Great. All right, I don't see any other questions.
There was another one from Andrea. We have our gas water heater tank in a closet on the outside of our house. Did you see that one, John?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have our gas water heater in a closet on the outside of our house. Can we just make sure the space is well vented, or would you recommend ducts to the inside conditioned air?
So that's not an installation scenario that Sunwork has tackled yet, but I know plenty of installers have. I think as long as the space is big enough for the sort of the extra dimensions of the heat pump water heater, and as long as it's a model that has some backup heating, so it's not exclusively reliant on the heat pump for heating to be able to deal with the handful of really cold winter days, I think that would be an installation scenario that would work okay. If Tom, do you have any other perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that's the right thing. And also, one thing that people end up doing is cutting a bigger vent in the doorway to let more of the cold air out, because the heat pump is grabbing heat out of the air in that little mechanical closet on the side of the house. And so that cold air needs to fall out somewhere. So cutting a bigger vent towards the bottom, or cutting the bottom of the door edge up a bit to let that cold air out, is the other way to keep it running efficiently. But I agree with Ruben, that's definitely a case where you would want to consider something like the 15 amp 240 volt heat pump water heater or the 30 amp. My bias again is always towards the power efficient, so I'd be looking at the 15 amp one and going forward.
Great, thank you both.
And that's assuming the closet's big enough to get a tank in that can meet your rush hour needs.
All right, Robert asks, will Sunwork do emergency replacements?
It's not on our official list of services provided at this time. We do have a hard time turning people away. So Sometimes.
You
Right.
aim to please, yeah. Okay. Any other questions out there? Again, feel free to raise your hand if you just want to ask it verbally. Nancy,
Hey there. I have a question about the new permit waiver. I realize it is less than a year old, and you did mention it's taking a bit of time. But if we were to, I'm in Pacifica, if we were to want to encourage our city to pursue that, is this under the sustainability manager? How would who would be, or what would be the best contact?
Yeah,
I'll try one answer. I think it would make sense to talk with the sustainability coordinator there and see if they can loop in the building chief building official to talk about it. The building department needs to generate some revenue because they, in a lot of cities, they are a source of revenue for city operations. So what happened in Menlo Park is the city council saw the importance and value of giving that relief. And so they essentially relieved the building department of the obligation to collect that revenue. So it was a council level decision, but starting with your sustainability coordinator to get them on board with approaching the council to produce that relief sounds like a good way to go. And then that leaves the building department kind of neutral. They've been taken off the hook from producing it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
all right, thanks for the question. Rich asks, does a hybrid heat pump water heater vented to the house mean we have to upsize a future heat pump system when we replace our gas furnace? Tom, you want to?
Yeah, I'm just thinking through that scenario. So that's a question really about the winter time and saying if it's drawing, 1,000 BTUs per hour from the house, would you need to upsize your heat pump, which is for the space heating, you're probably looking at a 24,000 to 36,000 BTU per hour heat pump for the house anyway. And then this other one drawing 2,000 BTUs per hour isn't too much of a drag on that. So you wouldn't really upsize it a full step because each step of heat pump sizing for the house is about a half a ton, about 6,000 BTUs per hour, a little bigger than or about twice the size of the full draw of the heat pump water heater. So it's like, yeah, but only half a ton. No, probably not is the other way to summarize it.
Why didn't you just say that?
It took me a while to get around to it. I was circling in.
Great. Rich, any follow-up questions to that answer? You're good, okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think that's it.
I think we have a
So-
couple more slides.
Yep. So let's go to those slides. Great. So again, great questions. Thanks to Tom and Ruben for providing helpful answers. This slide shows some additional resources as you embark on your electrification journey. We will share these slides with all attendees and provide our contact info should you have any further questions. So last slide, we'd love your feedback on this workshop. Nancy is going to drop the survey link into the chat. Please take a moment to share your thoughts with us. Again, we are grateful that you could join us, and we thank you for wanting to learn one way that you and your family can implement a climate solution. We are facing an obstacle that will require each and every one of us to participate in the effort to overcome it. I'd like to leave you with the words of Martin Luther King Jr. from his letter from Birmingham jail, and again from Amanda Gorman's poem, Earthrise. MLK writes, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And lastly, from Miss Gorman, "Together we do this and more, not because it is very easy or nice, but because it is necessary. And as heavy as that weight sounded, it doesn't hold us down, but it keeps us grounded, steady, ready, because an environmental movement of this size is simply another form of an earthrise." Thank you and have a great night.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.